Hello, everybody. Here I have with me Scott Brady. Hi, Scott.
Good morning.
Scott needs no introduction in terms of overlanding and off-road driving. I'm going to do I'm going to undersell you here, Scott.
Okay.
So I think
He's undersold me.
you're adventure traveler, photographer, businessman, CEO, and I'm underselling you. And I know you're very humble, but give me just a couple of minutes because not everybody knows your background and why I'm interviewing you.
Well, this all started for me after I joined the U.S. Air Force, and that was the first time I got to travel internationally. So I was stationed in all places Italy, so I felt pretty fortunate given where people were being sent in the world.
Yeah.
I was being sent to southern Italy. Now, that was during the whole Bosnian conflict.
Okay, so 90s, right?
Yep,
Yeah.
mid-90s.
Yeah.
And it really opened my eyes to the possibility of travel and experiencing new cultures and places completely different than my own. And I just found it totally fascinating. But I was young and I had no money, and I was also enlisted, so I had limited possibilities of travel.
Do what you're told.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, a lot of that, but also it's probably what I needed at that point in my life. And I look back so fondly on that time in the military. And then when I got out of the military, I went into business. I went to business school and spent nearly a decade between automotive component manufacturing and then ultimately in higher education software development.
Right.
And by the time that all started taking off, I then had a little bit more time and a little bit more money to start to travel more internationally. And that was really the impetus. It just took me a long time to get there. I knew I wanted to do that, but it took me a long time to get there. And that time that I spent in software development was really kind of the impetus for what began with Expeditions West and my first long trips, then the starting of expeditionportal.com and the community forum. And then just a year later, we started Overland Journal, the magazine. So,
and just to point out, all of those things are pretty successful for that community, right?
Yeah, they've done well. I mean, I think we were just very lucky to have started so early in the process. There was just this big white space, at least in North America, and very little awareness of overlanding within the North American consumer. So I saw it as a business opportunity and also a way to align my passion. And it's funny, I even before I went into the Air Force, I remember I had gone to this newsstand and I picked up this off-road magazine and it had Camel Trophy on the cover.
I was going to ask you about Camel Trophy, yeah.
And at the time I was a multi-sport athlete. I was doing triathlons, but I had a little bit of a love for cars. And I see these guys doing this and women, incredible travelers and drivers doing these events, these Camel Trophies. And I just was wide-eyed. I thought, this is what I want to do. I want to do this so bad. And it was interesting because I had, I got out of the Air Force in 1997, and I sent an application in to do the Camel Trophy. And it was so interesting because Tom Collins, who is someone that I have such admiration and respect for, lives in Colorado, and he was the U.S. director of the U.S. Camel Trophy teams. And he was kind enough to call me and just say, hey, everything looks really good, but we can't take you because you're still a reservist. So it would be understandable if they were to use me in the Camel Trophy and I got called up to some conflict somewhere in the world, that'd be a real problem for them. So you couldn't be.
But isn't it interesting when you talk to car people, especially talking about the Grenadier, and people go, oh yeah, remember the Camel Trophy and how long ago it was? And of course it started in the 70s, I think, with Jeeps, right? That was the first one.
It was started with Jeeps and then very quickly moved to Land Rovers.
But pretty influential though, right?
Incredible, certainly on me. I mean, I was absolutely intoxicated by the idea of doing these remote vehicle-based expeditions. And I remember when I was in the Air Force, I would go to the newly formed Land Rover dealership in Boise, Idaho, and I'd walk in there and they'd have the big TV like this with the videos of the Camel Trophy playing in the dealership. And it just left such an impression on me that there was a possibility to combine adventure and travel and vehicles together in a way that really at the time only Land Rover was able to pull off. There were other great four-wheel drives, but no one really completely captured that sense of
spirit of adventure, right? Yeah.
that spirit of adventure with a vehicle. And they basically built overland vehicles. That's what Land Rover did. They don't do that quite as much now. They have a couple models that are suitable, but at the time, every model was suitable.
Well, even the Range Rover the Range Rover with the 2.4 diesel in it. They even did the Range Rover, and that was still on its way up market, right? And then, of course, the Defender and the Discovery ones were doing it, and they were driving them through rivers and taking the doors off by a helicopter and up rivers, and it was like, wow, like as a, you know, you looked at that and it was just amazing. It's like, what does that with vehicles? But like I say, it combines the two things.
It was completely captivating for me. So that was very formative for me. And then once I was able to start the magazine and the forum, then I was able to do bigger trips.
Yeah.
And that's when the real, like the larger adventures, the around the world adventures.
So one thing I was going to ask you is, and it's a bit of a cliche, they say travel broadens the mind, right? And you go, you travel broadens the mind, yeah, and you jump on an aeroplane and whatever. But it literally does, doesn't it? You know, if you haven't been, even if you've already traveled and you go somewhere else, and especially if in a vehicle, because it's more personal, right, than jumping on a metal tube for 8 hours and then just pinging you in a city. And of course, all airports are the same, right? But if you do it in a vehicle, it's more personalized. And the fact that you've done it, whether it's 100 miles, 150 or 10,000 miles, whatever it is. So, and I think that puts a different slant on the, you know, than just, like I say, jumping on an airplane. And then when you're in a different, because I remember you talking about Uganda, and that's not something that the average American thinks about, right? I mean, what an amazing, it's just so culturally different, isn't it? And it's humbling in itself to see those places, right?
It's important for us. It's important for us to experience other cultures. Otherwise, I believe that people will remain in a mindset of othering.
Blinkered,
Like even look at the situation in our country where everything is about this person believes a little different than I do, or their political is a little different than mine.
Yeah.
And it's an apolitical statement. I'm sure both people on both sides of the ticket feel the same way.
Yes.
And there's a lot of othering going around. And the quickest way to remove that is to actually spend time with the other person.
Yeah.
So for me, I mean, Mark Twain, I think, said it similarly in that travel is fatal to prejudice. And as you start to spend time with people that are different than you, that speak a different language, that pray to a different God, that you know, coffee seems to be universal, but other than that, there's a lot of differences between human beings. And if you can spend time with them, for me, it was just, like you said, incredibly humbling and eye-opening. And it gave me this sense of insignificance, which I think is good.
Yeah.
I think for most of us, we feel, because we're self-centered by necessity, that the world kind of revolves around our little space. But the more time that we spend with people that are living a completely different life than us, and maybe even happier than a lot of people that I know in North America, that it's very humbling, and it adds to this sense that I'm just this one blip in cosmic time, and this even, you know, maybe a slightly larger blip in human time. And it helps you be a lot more open-minded and a lot less worried about, like, oh, did I get the fancy car with the you know, special leather and that color exactly like people get upset about that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, there is, and in any Western country, it's keeping up with the Joneses, right? And when you see somebody else, but I mean, the other thing I think from what you just said, humans tend to be fear-based creatures, right? So we fear anybody that doesn't look, sound, like you say, drink the same coffee as us, or maybe the different beer, different God, whatever it is. But when you sit down and talk to people, other than the language barrier, we're all kind of the same. And I think travel allows you to realize that. You know?
We all want to spend time with our buddies. We all want to keep our family safe. We all want to provide opportunity.
Basic
for our
human
family.
needs, right?
It's all exactly the same. And for me, it's encouraging. For me, it's just been such a wonderful reminder of how big and amazing this world is, and there's so much to see of it. So much to see of it, and we have such little time to experience it. So, we got to go.
So based on that then, has that kind of premise that you've just discussed, has that kind of changed where you're going to go next, if you can tell us? I know it might be super secret, right?
No, it's not. No, none of it's super secret. It's an interesting point in my journey because I spent the last 15 years trying to become the first person in history to cross all 7 continents. So it just took me like over a decade to finally make that happen. And I just chose to not plan anything once that's done because I do a poor job of being in the moment sometimes, like being present in this amazing experience that I'm having because I'm always thinking of what's the next thing. So I kind of forced myself by keeping my calendar clear to just enjoy having accomplished something that was really meaningful to me and to sit with those experiences and let it change me in the way that it needed to and not be so focused on what's the next big thing.
Go. But that's part of modern life's a bit like that, isn't it? So it's easy to slip into that kind of mindset of just what's the next? Yeah. So I
and it's hard to break that cycle.
Oh, yeah.
And so as of right now, there are a few things that I would like to do. So I'd love to ship a motorcycle or maybe another 4-wheel drive back to Africa, ship it into probably Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. And then now that Sudan is beginning to open up and I feel like I have a solution for Sudan, even though the civil war is still very much present.
Because that war was quite dangerous, Sudan, for a while, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I wasn't able to go into the country. I was close to having a solution, but it was too late. Given the time frame. And I also didn't want to expose the Grenadier, which was a vehicle that I was borrowing. I didn't want to expose it to that level of risk. Like I didn't feel like my personal risk was high because we were going to have a security team traveling with us.
Right.
It was more that I was concerned that something could happen with the car and I wouldn't even get it to the end of the trip. So that's why we turned right a little bit and went into Djibouti as opposed to going north into
right into Djibouti.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's funny.
So for me, I think that the idea of shipping a motorcycle or a 4-wheel drive to Ethiopia and completing Sudan and Egypt, and then from there into Jordan, from Jordan into northern Iraq, and then northern Iraq into Turkey. And Syria might even be a possibility. Syria is starting to stabilize a little bit. It's not very clear on what the visa process will be and how security will be, but it's possible within the next few years that both Sudan and Syria would open, which would be a very interesting route.
And when you go to some of these places that traditionally hasn't always been friendly with America, as an American, whether you're, especially on a bike, right? And then the type of vehicle, they'll probably identify you anyway as being from wherever. Is that generally, you know, because of the media likes to hype up this stuff that, oh, America this, America that, or there's other countries. But when you're there, you know, you from what you've said, you get a pretty positive reaction because people like to speak to foreigners, right? You know, they're like, wow, that's really cool.
I've only had positive experiences in my travels. The most I ever got yelled at for being an American was in Paris. So, you know, which, you know, I look back on it and I don't even blame the guy. Like at the time when this happened, it was a time when there was a lot of uncertainty in Europe around what was America going to do. And I think that it was just fear. And like I was the one, you know, outlet that he could identify. You know, it's probably why I changed my cap. So I'm a little harder to identify now, but for the most part, absolutely safe. I mean, I've had a few security instances happen, but it was not because I was an American. It was because I was a target.
Right.
Somebody that, you know, wanted bad things to happen. So
good to know.
But not because I was an American. I think that the world pays very close attention to what the U.S. does. Because of its influence economically and geopolitically. And they find Americans, I mean, a lot of people grow up with American movies and TV shows and music and comedians and everything else like that. So they do have, I think it's two feelings. One is a little bit of uncertainty around what the government is going to do, but a general kind of curiosity around what an American would be like to meet one.
A real one. And they're almost like celebrities, right? Yeah.
It can happen.
Yeah, me as a British person living out here, I'm very, very similar. But I always say to Americans, you know, I grew up with like I say, a massive amount of American television. So I kind of knew all the phrases and the unit vehicles, right? And stuff that you'd never see.
Yep.
So yeah, American culture is, through popular culture, it is huge in different countries.
It can be, and it's had a lot of influence on the world.
Yeah.
A lot of the tech that people use around the world is influenced by our country.
Yeah.
So in general, it's been very positive.
Yeah.
I just haven't, I can't even think of anything other than that one situation that happened in Paris in a walk across the street.
Yeah. Were you wearing a Stars and Stripes t-shirt?
No, I wasn't. I think I was just, I looked more like an American tourist. This was quite some time ago.
Yeah.
And I think I had a ball cap on.
Right.
And I kind of, at the time, I just looked more, my goatee was shorter.
Right.
I guess I looked a little more American.
That's funny.
Picked me out of the crowd.
So the other thing I wanted to ask you was inspirational vehicles. What? I know you've driven a ton of stuff. What's something that really floats your boat? And there's lots of different aspects to vehicles, right? You don't like this, do like that. This is good, that's not so good, whatever. But as an all-rounder, what really makes you tick?
I think that I'm most interested in a class of vehicle that I call a pinnacle vehicle. And there are, if we were to go back even 10 years, there would be a much longer list of them. But let's go back 15 years in time or so, and you would have seen a solid axle Nissan Patrol,
Oh yeah.
which was an extremely robust vehicle. It had the strongest axles of any of the pinnacle vehicles. In later years, the engine choices were less robust or less desirable. But for the most part, a Nissan Patrol was an excellent wagon to drive around the world.
And didn't that predate the Land Cruiser by 2 years or 3 years or something? I think it was slightly before, wasn't it?
It could have been.
I
think it was just slightly the other direction, where the Land Cruiser came out and shortly thereafter the Patrol did.
Oh, it was the other way around, yeah.
But they were very contemporary to each other. And a similar situation where there was these requirements that the Japanese industry had to produce vehicles like that. And it's funny because my family owned a cattle ranch for a period of time in Arizona. And the vehicles that we had on the ranch were the old Nissan Patrols.
Oh, okay.
So they were from the 60s. Wow. And that was the only time we ever got a Patrol in the United States. Was in the 60s. And then, so the Patrol would be one that I would consider a pinnacle vehicle. The classic Defender would be another one that I would classify as a pinnacle vehicle, particularly if you could get around a 1997 or so rest of the world spec 300 TDI Defender. These were very reliable vehicles. I have a 200 TDI 3-door model myself, 110, and it does have little problems, like electrical mostly, but other than that, it drives and starts and operates. It's been flawless for 10 years. Like, it's never let me down.
And I think that's down to the simplicity. I have a 98 one with a V8, so the same, and it never misses a beat. But it's so simple.
So simple.
It has electronics on it, such as the alternator, which yours doesn't. Yours is. It doesn't have a distributor, right? Because it doesn't. Fuel injected diesel. But yeah, mine's pretty basic. But they there's nothing to go wrong on them.
Yeah, this one will run. If you had a 9-volt battery, you can open up the fuel solenoid and you could bump start it, and it would run until it ran out of fuel.
Yeah.
Like, it would never need another electrical connection because of the diesel cycle. So I think a Defender 110 is a great example.
Yeah.
The 461 and the 463 Mercedes G-Wagons were another example of a pinnacle vehicle in my mind. So there were these cars, Toyota Land Cruiser, 76, 78, 79, Toyota Land Cruiser. Those are all great examples. An 80 series Land Cruiser, basically any J series Toyota Land Cruiser. So that would be, J 80 series, 100 series, 200 series, and now the 300 series, which is available globally. And in the US, we receive it as what's called a J305, which is the Lexus variant. And the new one, the new Lexus 700H, is triple diff locked. So like, we are finally getting pinnacle vehicles in the US. And I think that's why it was such a great time for the Grenadier, because people were interested in vehicles like that.
Definitely filled that gap, didn't it?
It did.
Yeah.
It did. So, with the loss of the classic Defender, And it's not to say, and I think that this is really important to say, it's not to say that the new Defender is not great for travel. It's actually one of the better travel vehicles out there. You just have to be mindful of the fact that it's not well suited to remote travel with limited infrastructure.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's a very complex vehicle, and even though it's more reliable than a Land Rover of 2004, let's call it, it's still not going to be a 300 series Land Cruiser. So
no, but I mean the world's changed, right? And the reason that the Defender stopped was because the lack of airbags and emission standards and everything else has changed. You couldn't simply build a vehicle like that, even if you wanted to.
that's true.
So
Unless you were Jim Radcliffe.
but even he has to, he even has to play by the rules and tick all those safety boxes. It's got to be emission compliant, the windshield, the lights, the no sharp edges. And I think that was the thing with the Cybertruck. And if you've seen that, they're talking about trying to get that into different countries, and the lighting's easy to change, but the shape of it.
Oh yeah, impaling pedestrians.
It is, those sharp edges in European law is very very different. Yeah, so
I could see that. I could see that. So for me, those are the vehicles that are really interesting to me from the perspective of travel. Is those pinnacle vehicles. But there's also other ones that are quite interesting. Like Mercedes for many years made what was called a W123, which was a diesel sedan. It
the
was
African
also
taxi, right?
That's right. A famous taxi around the world. 240D, there was a 300D. They were available also as a wagon. And they're one of the better travel vehicles that you can get for the price and for how durable and reliable they are. And they were sold in 170 countries, so including the US.
And I think, didn't they carry on making it after it finished in Germany? They made it somewhere else, in a couple of countries or somewhere like that. I can't remember now. But they carried on making it, a bit like the VW Beetle, right? They carried on making it in Mexico. It wasn't Mexico, but
But that's like if you didn't want a four-wheel drive or you wanted something that was very under the radar, those vehicles are incredible. And you could pick one up for $4 or $5 grand. And they run forever.
And
literally forever.
I didn't realize, you probably do, but Peugeot had a phenomenal reputation in Africa for being comfortable and over-engineered.
Like the 504.
And the 505 and the 504. And they were the African car. And I think they were built there as well up until, and in Argentina, I think they kept on making that as well. But those durable cars for not so good roads, basic, and they kept on going. Now they're all falling by the wayside. Then there's the Indian Hindustan Ambassador. That was ridiculous that they made that for like 50 years.
They did.
What was it, Morris Oxford from the 50s? And they kept on banging it out. That's
because those are great cars. Like when I was just in Ethiopia in this incredible town called Harar, which was, it's a holy place for the Muslim faith. It's an ancient part of the trade route from Africa with ivory and stuff into the Middle East and spices from the Middle East coming into Africa. And it's incredible town. And most of the taxis are Peugeot 504s.
Oh, really?
Like you.
I used to go to school in one, that's why I remember the 504.
Fantastic cars. Fantastic cars. So there's a lot out there, and I think that vehicles that are meant to transport us into our dreams of wherever we want to go, those are the ones that are most exciting to me.
And I think with a lot of newer stuff, you don't necessarily get that unless you pick very carefully, right?
Yes.
You
very carefully.
Pick very, very carefully. As to what. So in terms of the Grenadier in Africa, then, from what you've just said with basic vehicles, how did that work when you were in Africa? Because you were living out of the thing, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And you were totally self-reliant on it. How did it do?
The vehicle did incredible. And for me, this is important to note in this podcast. I was never paid by Ineos to do that. So they provided me with a loaner vehicle that I could borrow for the length of the trip. But I received no compensation of any kind. They're not an advertiser in my magazine or on our websites or anything like that. The reason why I was so interested in the Grenadier is because here's a car company that started to make cars for you and me. They literally make overland vehicles. That's all they do.
And also the other incredible thing I think with Ineos is they weren't making cars before.
That's right.
To get from an idea that was drawn on a banknote.
That's right.
To get to a running vehicle that has a warranty and everything else.
It's unbelievable.
in such a short period of time is nuts, right? Yeah, this is crazy.
So for me, there was 2 goals. I was so impressed by the fact that they even thought to do it that I said, I need to help support a new company that's leaning in so far into the overland space.
Yeah.
I want to give them coverage and support. I want people to be aware of it, help them, raise the awareness of the vehicle. And the second goal was, and the reason why I didn't take any compensation, is I wanted to test it. I wanted to see if it could actually, prove out the promise of this vehicle in something like crossing Africa. And it was also the last continent that I needed on the long axis to cross all 7 continents. So it seemed like a really fun and an interesting way to test this brand new vehicle on the market. And I talked to Greg Clark and Colleen from the North America team. This was now almost 4 years ago when they first showcased it was a running prototype, but with an incomplete interior. So the exterior was mostly there, 90-something% there.
Oh, okay.
But the interior was just wires and, panic buttons and basically a milk crate you were sitting on.
PTO ones, I think they were called, yeah. Yeah.
So I got a chance to see that vehicle, and I talked to Greg about the idea, and then Greg went to the team in the UK, and everybody signed off on the idea of me taking one of their cars. And then, with production challenges and COVID and everything else like that, it was becoming very difficult to get a vehicle. So they called me up one day and they said, hey, we're probably not going to be able to build it exactly to your spec, but we have this green Fieldmaster with the off-road pack on it, and it's gas like you need, petrol. Do you want to take that one? And I'm like, sign me up, because I knew it was going to be hard to get the car that I wanted, which I wanted a white one in a Trial Master with the dual battery systems, and
so it wasn't quite what you wanted, but it was stock, right?
It was totally stock.
Yeah, and the other is, I'm going to quick petrol. Don't know what that is. I'm joking. Yeah. But petrol, the reason for petrol, right, or gasoline, is because diesel is of dubious quality, right?
That's exactly why.
Yeah.
So it's funny, most traditional overlanders, will die on that hill of diesel, but unfortunately, it just doesn't work in the modern day, at least not yet. Because if you were to just drive your diesel Grenadier around South Africa and Botswana and Namibia, you'd be fine, because you can get ultra low sulfur diesel in all of those countries, including Tanzania and into Kenya. But once you get done with that, you cannot find ultra low sulfur diesel, and these vehicles will pack up in a hurry.
Yeah.
Like, for example, in Ethiopia, it's 2,000 ppm, which the sulfur count is so high. And whereas in South Africa, it's 50 ppm.
Yeah.
So the difference is the vehicle can't run on it.
And that high pressure fuel injection system that they all are now doesn't like that sort of...
the filters don't work. The
dodgy quality diesel, right?
It just doesn't work.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work. Yeah. So that's why I needed to go with the petrol, is then I knew, there's motorcycles in every country. In fact, there's more motorcycles than cars in every country, especially when you're in the developing world. Yeah. And they all use benzene or petrol or unleaded, depending on what you want to call it. And that's why I selected the petrol model.
Okay.
And it drives great. Like, the petrol was a joy to drive the entire time.
I think one of the criticisms about the Grenadier, and this is normally from people who haven't driven one, when you give them the specs, they go, right? Because they're focused mainly on, like 332 foot-pounds of torque, 282 horsepower. And they kind of go, okay, especially in America, where it's the horsepower that's the most important thing, right? But when they drive it,
it's got plenty of power.
They're like, whoa. Or the other way around it is, if you get someone in it and don't tell them the figures and just get them to drive it, and they're like, wow, this is amazing. So I think they've done a
plenty of power.
Phenomenal job on retuning that engine, which is effectively is a high-revving car engine.
Yep.
But it suits the Grenadier perfectly. So,
and they did some important things. They could have come out with the engine at the typical kind of BMW 3-liter car wagon spec, which would be, or even the X5, which would be over 330 horsepower.
That's right, yeah.
So they detune the engine for it to be able to take lower octane fuels and to reduce some of the stress, run at a lower turbo rating, and all of that directly correlates to durability, reliability in the field.
Yeah.
So at one point I was running 85 octane in a car that's spec'd for 91, and it never hiccuped.
Yeah.
So all the way across Africa, nearly 20,000 miles of driving this vehicle, I never had a single failure. I never had a mechanical failure. I never had an electronics failure with the vehicle. I had, some check tire pressure stuff come on, and you just go in and reset that, or change the pressure depending on the elevation that you're at. And then I did have some damage to the steering damper, which sits a little bit low, and we were driving through mud for days, deep ruts and stuff. And it broke a little weld on the cover for the shaft, and it kind of dinged like a bell, ding, 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 going down the trail. So I swapped it out. I had a spare with me. And it was no problem. Done deal.
Okay. And for the people who are wondering, Africa, where did you go from and to, and how far was it? And how long did it take?
Yeah, so it was a total of about a year and a half. I wasn't traveling the entire time. I would travel for 2 or 3 months and then come back to the US for about 6 weeks and then fly back and continue my journey. Continue my journey on. I like to travel in that kind of a pacing. Because I like to come back, and I miss my family, and I miss
a lot of laundry to do, right?
Yeah, a lot of laundry, and there's a lot of images, and you got to kind of process the experience and write about it for the magazine. And we were producing a video series as well.
So there's lots of genuine work to do in between, right?
And logistics and planning for the next segment. So that way we could really be well prepared when we got there to take advantage of that time. So we started off in the UK, is where I took delivery of the vehicle. And I did some testing with it on their test track, just to make sure I understood how everything worked and that everything did work. And then I took it to the Grenadier pub in London. And then I dropped it back off at INEOS headquarters, and they were going to ship it because it was still classified as a new vehicle and it wasn't modified. They could ship it roll on, roll off, like they did with all of the other Grenadiers going to South Africa. So it was a very inexpensive way to ship it to South Africa. So it came into Durban, and it took a little bit of work getting the carnet de passage all finished up, because it was coming in not to be homologated into South Africa. It was coming in to me personally. The vehicle was titled in my name for the trip, and the carnet was in my name as well. And for those that are listening to understand what a carnet de passage is, it's basically the passport for the car. So it's the thing that allows the country that you're visiting to say, okay, I'm going to fill out this paperwork and I'm going to take this receipt. And then when you get to the other border, you better have it signed out and get the other receipt. Otherwise, they're going to claim what's usually a very large bond against the vehicle, because what they don't want you to do is bring the vehicle in and then sell it. So it prevents someone from selling the vehicle in the country. Same thing applies to expensive camera gear. A lot of times people will need to have a carnet, or a movie crew will need to have a carnet and all that.
Get it in, get it out.
Get it in, get it out. So there was a little bit of delay on the carnet, but that just allowed me to explore around South Africa for a bit longer. So then I took delivery of the vehicle in Durban, and then I drove it into Johannesburg, where I had a few modifications done to the vehicle for storage and for sleeping. So the Grenadier was unmodified mechanically. Like, I didn't lift it, I didn't change the springs, I didn't put bigger tires on it. It just did the entire trip stock. But I did need to have a way to carry about 90 to 100 liters of more of fuel. Because there were places where I was going to need a 1,000-kilometer range. So I needed to have 2 jerry cans, and then I also had 2 rollable fuel bladders that could carry about 20 liters each. So I had 2 jerry cans and then 2 20-liter.
And they were inside the truck?
No, I would always keep them on the rack on top. And at the time, INEOS did not have a 3/4 rack, so I went with a front runner rack, a slimline front runner rack, which is a great product, and a couple fuel can holders. I mounted a set of 4 max tracks to the top, and then a place to strap down those fuel bladders. And then I also had a water tank on top as well, but well below the vehicle's 280-pound or so maximum roof load limit. So well below that. And the fact that the vehicle wasn't lifted, the center of gravity was still very...
Not a problem for moving around. Yeah.
And then on the inside, we had a custom sleeping platform made. And under the platform, we could slide a couple, basically, ammo boxes.
So you took the rear seats out?
No,
Or the rest of the rear seats in?
we designed it in a way where we could fold the back seats down, and then a platform would hinge up and over and rest on the top of the seat.
To make it flat.
To make it flat. It had a slight rise to it, so you were a little bit head up, which is okay for And then I used a couple Melville and Moon bedrolls in the back, and I had a 25-liter Dometic fridge, because it is nice to have cold drinks in hot climates. So I did that, and I had a little lithium-ion Dometic auxiliary battery that I would use to power the fridge and the Starlink at times. And then that would charge off of the vehicle while it was running, because it didn't have the auxiliary battery, because it was a Fieldmaster.
Right.
I mean, a Fieldmaster. So that was the extent of it. There was no other modifications done to the car. Some Melville and Moon seat covers, because it had leather seats, which can get a little hot in certain climates. So the canvas seat covers made it a lot more comfortable.
So so you picked it up in Durban, and then where did you end up? I know you broke it up to come back to the US, but where did you end up?
So we went down to Cape Town, saw the INEOS facility for Sub-Saharan Africa, which is right in Cape Town, right on the ocean. Stunning, beautiful place. And that was where we kind of kicked off from. We went to Cape Agulhas, which is the southernmost point of South Africa, southernmost point of the African continent. And then we began our drive north. So we went up the eastern coast of Africa and crossed into a fantastic little country called Mozambique. And there's it's kind of like the Baja of South Africa. So, great little beach towns, but I mean, I'm not a surfer, but there would look like some awesome surfing spots and a lot of people surfing.
But South Africa is people forget, right? South Africa is a pretty big country. I mean, even you say, I've done the drive from Durban to Johannesburg, or Durban to Pretoria, which is not far away. And that's an epic journey in itself, right? Because you go through the Orange, or what used to be called the Orange Freestyle, and what they call it now. But that's stunning countryside, right? It's just, but it's not as known as like the Grand Canyon or Ayers Rock or whatever, but, in Australia. But it's amazing scenery, isn't it, South Africa?
Southern Africa or South Africa, I would actually just say Southern Africa to me is the place that I love the most in the world. I mean, it's just got the most diversity. It's got, I mean, you get that sense of like, this is where we all came from. So, I mean,
but I mean, the people are super hospitable, aren't they? South Africans are generally
wonderful,
no matter who they are, where they're from, whatever. They're great. So
I just walk around, I'm walking around in flip-flops and jeans and a t-shirt the whole time. And the weather doesn't vary that much. So it just feels really comfortable to be there, as a human, so you can tell like this is clearly where humans would have thrived for a long period of history. And so that in and of itself feels very comfortable to me because, like I remember the first time I heard a lion roar, or actually not even roar, just kind of do this grunt. And it was unmistakable to me that that was a lion. So like somewhere deep down in my hypothalamus, it's like, be careful there, buddy, because that thing's going to eat you. So, but I love that. I love that about Africa. I love the fact that you can feel like you're close to this origin story of humanity. The people are incredible. The food's incredible. The weather's incredible. The wildlife, even the four-wheeling down there. It's just awesome.
I do like South Africa. So where did you, we're going off a tangent here, but where did you end up by the time you'd finished?
So Mozambique, Malawi, and then into Tanzania, Tanzania into Kenya. In Tanzania, we crossed the Serengeti, Ngorongoro, into Kenya, drove up Mount Kenya. We got up over 10,000 feet.
Wow.
And by this point in time, the Grenadier was flawless. And I'm thinking, I need to push this thing harder because it's not given up. It's like not even.
Lower quality fuel at higher elevation, was it still good?
Nothing. No issue. Not even a check engine light came on.
Really?
Which I was expecting that because elevation with low quality fuel can create
and stuff, right?
Can create a little bit of a ping, or it starts to operate outside of its range. But no issues. And so we started doing more and more off-roading with it, like really remote technical tracks. And so I hooked up with the very first Grenadier owner in Africa. His name is Abid, and he lives in Nairobi. And so I hooked up with him, and we decided to go to Lake Turkana, and we did hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles of corrugations. There was, at one point, there was banditry happening in the region. We were 15 minutes behind a carjacking. You know, it was a rough and tumble area of Africa, and to Lake Turkana, which is just this incredible ancient Rift Valley lake.
And did it get lots of? You go into these places where at that time they might not have even seen a grenadier. What was the response to people? Because they're probably used to seeing different vehicles, right?
It's funny in North America, people say, "Is that a G-Wagon?"
Yeah.
And in Africa, they say, "Is that a Defender?" Because it's such a familiar shape. So, but it's funny in the U.S., people see it more as a G-Wagon.
Yeah.
And it is kind of that homologation of G-Wagon 70 series. Again, if you take the best of all the pinnacle vehicles, it looks like that. It looks like a Grenadier.
Well, I remember Greg Clark had a great phrase, and he used to say that this is the greatest hits of four-wheel drive, which I think sums it up perfectly. Because the rear doors are kind of 70 series Land Cruiser, side profile, a little bit Defender, maybe Land Cruiser.
Or G-Wagon.
Front, especially when you look at it square on, it is definitely G-Wagon. So he's absolutely right, isn't he? It's got the best bits.
I think so.
Yeah.
What was funny, though, is some of the countries had never had a Grenadier across the border.
No.
So, like, when I went to Mozambique, and they were just the sweetest people about it. They're like trying to put it in their system, and it didn't exist. They have their drop-down menu.
Oh, okay.
When you're temporarily importing the car.
Toyota.
Yeah. And it wasn't on the list. Ineos wasn't on the list. But they were so cool about it. They were so excited that we were there, and they knew I showed them the magazine, and they knew what we were there to talk about their country. So they call into Maputo, into the capital, and they get the IT guy out of bed, and
he Googles it,
and he types it into the system, and then they let us in. It was just not a problem. It was not. I mean, we ended up having some real challenges later on, which we'll get to in this story. But so then Serengeti, Ngorongoro, up into Kenya, and then Mount Kenya, Nairobi, Lake Turkana, and then we get into Ethiopia. And Ethiopia was a real challenge because that country was still in civil war, and they just weren't letting tourists across the border, the land borders with vehicles. They weren't allowing a temporary import or even a carnet to bring a vehicle into the country. So I just kept working with the Ethiopian government and with their tourism board and with one of their really well-known tourism like providers, and we finally got the right people and the right conversations happening, and I started getting these letters of approval. So the Minister of Tourism says it's probably a good idea for us to let this guy in with his magazine. He's going to talk about our country. Right. He writes a letter to the Minister of Customs, and then the Minister of Customs says that's probably a good idea.
This is when the bureaucracy starts to kick in, right?
But to their credit, and this is important for me to say, they never once asked for a dime. There was a processing fee, and that was what I was paying to this tourism, guy. He was the one who was coordinating and doing all the translating. He was paid for his time.
Right.
But it wasn't a bribe.
Yeah.
He was paid for his time, and I didn't pay any of these agents.
Which is unusual, because normally in Africa everything has a dollar value to it, right?
Sometimes, but I think that's what's a little bit different about Ethiopia. Ethiopia was never conquered as a nation. In fact, it's the only African country to have never been conquered. So they never kind of lost that.
You mean by the pesky British colonists?
Yeah, or any colonizing, European country.
Yeah,
They tried. The Italians tried, and they got pretty far in from the coast, but they never took the country. In fact, it was the first time that a Western army had been defeated by an African army. Was in Ethiopia when the Italians attempted to take Addis and that whole region.
And they sent them on their way.
And they lost. And so they never were conquered. So there is like a pride, and not in a bad way. They have this very strong sense of self as a country, which is a little less obvious in some of the other African countries.
Right.
So because they were colonized for so long that it kind of disrupted some of who they originally were.
Yeah, when you look at Africa as a place, though, and all of the different colonizing efforts from all over the world, it's pretty scary, really. Yeah. It wasn't that long ago, was it? So all the different, the Dutch and the Portuguese and the British, obviously, and it's like, wow, that's crazy. Yes, and there's all those influences in the architecture and the, in the bureaucracy, right? And there's still a lot of that stuff still exists, right?
Very, very much so. And all of it just requires some patience, which is different from the Americas. In the Americas, people can take, or the bureaucrats can take a very aggressive stance and basically demand a bribe. In Africa, I have had lots of people suggest that I should provide them with one.
When they suggest, are they doing it with some sort of a firearm?
Nope.
Oh, okay.
I've never had that experience. And also, if you just stop because I do my best to never pay a bribe. So I realize I'm there as a tourist.
Yeah.
I don't want to make it harder on the next guy that comes behind me, the next traveler that comes behind me. So I just stop and I ask them about their country and I tell them how grateful I am to be there, which is all true. I am grateful to be there. And I do love their country. And they start to realize like that they're a representation of what I'm experiencing in their space. And before you know it, everybody's laughing. Maybe I give him a cold Coke and we're having a conversation.
Yeah.
Next thing you know, he's taking selfies with me in the truck with his camera phone.
Yeah.
And then I'm on my way and I don't pay a bribe. But it does require a degree of patience. If you're in a hurry, they got you.
Yeah.
Because you want to get on the road. You're late for your flight or whatever, so don't be in a hurry when you're in Africa if you don't want to pay a bribe. Yeah, so Ethiopia was beyond description, and I'll provide you guys with some images that you can overlay on the video if you'd like, but just absolutely incredible and challenging roads and these very like retained cultural components, like very unique villages, one so unique from the next, and they all wanted to offer me their local beer, which was more chewy than drinkable, it seemed at times, but yeah, it was incredible.
Right.
Ethiopia was just incredible. And then from there, it was time to go into our last country, which was Djibouti. And the problem is when we arrived in Ethiopia, the war in the Middle East kicked off. That was when all of the missiles were being lobbed into Israel, and then Israel starts lobbing missiles back, and tensions were as high as they could get. And we had timed it where we were going to get through the border before the start of Ramadan, because it's a very important part of their religion and their culture, but it does change the way that work is done.
Right.
They work during shorter periods of time, and they're also fasting during the day.
Yep.
You know, like think about how you would feel if you hadn't had a meal all day and someone's now asking you to come into your country. You'd maybe be a little less, enthusiastic and supportive. So I was trying to avoid that, but then the war kicks off and fuel's not available, and we come up to the border with Ethiopia. We had some challenges getting out of Ethiopia, and that delayed us further. And then we finally get to the border of Djibouti, and we were almost done with the process. They had checked us in on our passports, stamped our passports, mostly done with the carnet and everything on the vehicle. And then this one guy, as we were about to drive off, he comes running up to the truck, stop for inspection. And that was when we ran into some challenges with the guy who was a little higher up in the process, was like, why are these guys here? Two military-age males in this vehicle, Americans. What are you doing here? The questions start. What is this vehicle? We've never seen this before. We don't know what a grenadier is.
Thought you were one of the three-letter agencies, right?
That happens at times with us. But so they delay that. We spend the first night at the border sleeping in the Grenadier. And the interesting thing about this border, it's kind of a three-way border with Somalia, Djibouti, and Ethiopia. So the Somalians are coming in from this kind of little corner straight out from Mogadishu. And a lot of them are coming into Djibouti because it is Ramadan. So maybe they're returning to see their families or going the other direction. There's a lot of people moving around in the country. And so we're in this dirt lot, and there's part of a goat over here and about 16 broken down Land Cruisers that have various parts removed because they were not allowed to enter. And I'm saying the Grenadier better not look like that. And so we spent our first night sleeping in the truck on the border, didn't get any sleep because buses are coming in and out and these bright lights are on from the military base there. And the next day, we spent the whole day trying to get in, communicating with people, elevating our concerns within the Djiboutian government, and then also starting to engage the U.S. State Department. So now the State Department is aware that they have two Americans stuck at the border of Somalia, Djibouti, and Ethiopia in what is now the start of the war in the Middle East. So the State Department took a keen interest in our plight because the last thing that they wanted is a couple Americans having a problem at the border of any kind. And I have a great friend in the State Department. His name's JJ. He's been on our podcast many times. And he was the one that was kind of helping me through security concerns or places to avoid as I moved my way up through Africa. And I'm communicating directly with JJ now, and he's connecting me with his counterpart in Djibouti City. And so things are starting to move a little bit. We're starting to get a little bit of encouraging information, and then it's the start of Ramadan on that same day. So this was now, out of respect, all these people have not eaten all day. So I'm not gonna like go into the Grenadier fridge and pull out an orange or anything. So we
brings a new meaning to the word hangry, right?
We were, yeah, and it's a good test of patience.
Yeah.
And the whole time I had to remind myself, I was here because I wanted an adventure. And you don't have an adventure until something goes wrong. So like, other than that, I'm just a tourist. So like, I was there for that. Like, that was the reason I was there, was to experience something completely unexpected. So I kept reminding myself, like, you want to be here. This is gonna be incredible memories. I didn't feel unsafe, even though there was the potential for it to be unsafe. And then we finally got connected with a group called the Maril Group in Djibouti City. And the Maril Group actually had some interest in becoming an INEOS dealer. So they're the dealer for Toyota in that whole region. They sell Toyotas into Somalia and Djibouti and into Eritrea. And they were interested in getting the dealership for Grenadier. So that created this little line of communication to a very influential business within Djibouti. And they also happen to do shipping. And they also happen to deal with logistics, importing vehicles, and they had great contacts directly with the customs officials. So by the end of that day, we thought we were gonna get out, and we were getting really close, but it didn't happen. So then as soon as the sun sets, then you can eat again. So now Brian Bass, Dr. Brian Bass, who was with me on the trip, I call him the real Indiana Jones. He's 1,000 times cooler than I am. So I'm there with Brian Bass, and we're making dinner now, and we're hanging out with the customs officials and the police, and we're all, because everybody's happy to be eating. So we're all hanging out, talking, and as much as we could. Some of them spoke English. And I knew it was gonna be another night in the Grenadier. So another night, but this night I slept a lot better because I felt like that we might have a solution at play. Because what they were doing is they were threatening us that we would have to put the vehicle on a transport truck and drive it to the port, that I wouldn't be able to finish the trip. I was only 70 kilometers from the end. Year and a half, 20-something thousand kilometers of driving.
And you can't do the last 70.
And I wouldn't have been able to, so I'm like, oh, we got to find this out, make this work. And the next day, now things are happening, letters are getting signed, the customs official is telling us it's gonna be okay. But the guy, because it was Ramadan, again, the guy who was the customs dude in charge that could actually give me back my carnet, he was nowhere to be found. So now we go through the whole day, and there was this overlander that lived in Djibouti. He's ex-French Foreign Legion paratrooper. Overlander's driven all around Africa. His name's Ali, incredible human being. And he drives 2 hours to the border to say hi to us. And he shows up with hot coffee, hot tea, baguettes, fresh oranges, eggs and food, like he had gotten food made for us. And it brought me to tears. I literally started crying because it was like just to see that little sense of humanity, like that someone would go 2 hours out of their way just to come and bring us some food. And then he starts yelling at everybody in the customs. He was a paratrooper, like he's for French Foreign Legion, and Djiboutians were
just Foreign Legion is no short order, right? I mean, those are proper badasses.
Proper badasses. And he grew up in Pakistan, joined the French Foreign Legion, and Djibouti was, a French colony for a long time, and there's still a lot of French military presence there. So they paid attention, and he was yelling and screaming, but they couldn't find this guy in charge to give us our carnet back. So then he decides we're gonna go into the little village. We went into the village, and we got to walk around, at least get out of the border. And then we came back, and sure enough, the guy finally shows up. I could see it in his face. Like he felt some shame around what had happened because he
Right.
was the one that caused the whole problem.
Right.
And now he has the U.S. State Department calling him, the director of customs or the customs secretary for the country. It's like, what are you doing to these guys?
So he felt some pressure when he came back, right?
When he finally came back on the grid and turned his phone back on. Yeah, so he very sheepishly handed the carnet and just said, go.
So you got to drive that last.
Yeah, so we got to drive the last 70 kilometers. And then the Grenadier actually became the first Grenadier ambulance in Africa because unfortunately our French Foreign Legionnaire, he was so enthusiastic about us being there, was so excited. He wanted to do the Toyota jump off the front of the Grenadier. And he wasn't a young man, very fit, but probably in his late 60s or early 70s.
Okay, explain what the Toyota jump is.
So, you'll see it on a lot of Toyota commercials where just the owner jumps in the air and puts their hands up, and it's kind of like the Toyota jump.
Oh, okay.
So he does that off of the bumper of the Grenadier. And I told him, you don't need to do that. But, and he, like a proper French Foreign Legionnaire, he airs it out. And when he lands, his feet slip out from underneath him, and he gets like a skateboarder, puts his hands down, breaks his arm.
Oh,
So poor guy. So we load him up into the Grenadier and we drive him the 2 hours or so into the military base, the French military base in Djibouti City, so he could have surgery. So the Grenadier became an ambulance that day too. So crazy.
that is just I mean, I could tell by the way you're passionately talking about that. What's that been, the last 10 minutes or whatever?
Yeah.
50 minutes? What an amazing story. That's
Yeah, thank you.
incredible.
It was incredible. And then we got to go to Lake Assal, which is the lowest point in Africa.
When you were talking about that, just to interject, it reminds that I would have found so stressful. But the way, and I think you were kind of alluding to that a little bit, that it was like, but you had to kind of, and I think we mentioned that to start with, right? You've got to stop and go, this is the now, not focusing on the, which is easy to do in retrospect, right? But that's what a crazy freaking story that is. That's nuts.
And that's the other benefit of travel.
Yeah.
Is it exposes us to things we would have never expected. And if you think about someone who is new to Grenadier and they buy this incredibly capable vehicle, and then they go get training and they learn how to use it, and they take it out on their first adventure, and maybe they get stuck and they need to use the winch, or they have to stick a set of max tracks underneath it, or their partner needs to get out and spot them through a technical bit. They end the day more confident than they started the day because they've overcome these challenges. And after 20 years of doing that, including being in the military myself, I just don't get rattled as easy as I used to.
And I think also there's a thing about failing, isn't there? In general, society is not very good if you fail at something, whereas certainly for overland travel and amongst other things, failure is generally a learning exercise, right? That's very much going to put you on a slightly different, hopefully better track, and you're going to learn from that and grow. But at the time, it just feels like, oh, what the hell?
I think that's an important point, is that, the only way that we get better, you think about going to the gym and lifting weights, you're really sore the next day.
Oh, yeah.
But you get stronger and you get stronger and you get stronger. And failure does that for us. And I think of all the mistakes that I've made in business, the failures that I've had in business, the mistakes that I've made in travel, the times that I've gotten stuck, the things that I've screwed up or done wrong. And there's been a lot of them. I've made a lot of mistakes as a traveler and in business, but they all help me get stronger and make better decisions the next time. So if we try so hard to avoid failure, you never actually give yourself the experience to make good choices.
Well, then you're afraid of failing, so you're afraid of doing, and then you never learn, and then it's a vicious cycle, right? So, and that's, I mean, not that either of us are experts on life in general, but it is.
It's so true.
It's true, right? Yeah,
and our life has an expiration date. We just don't know when it's going to be.
I know, and that's really
so
scary.
It's really important to remember that, like, whatever you're going to do today, make it cool, because we don't know how many days we got.
Okay. Well, it's been great to talk to you, Scott. Thank you. What we're going to do now is have a wander downstairs, and we're going to check out your quartermaster.
Let's do it.
Do you want to just give us a little brief overview?
Absolutely. So this is a 2024 quartermaster.
Yeah.
And it is, the thing that I like about it, I would describe it as like a heavy-duty midsize, which is something that just isn't available in the U.S. market.
Yeah.
In some markets, you can get something that's called a Hilux, and it is a heavy-duty midsize.
Yeah.
But we don't have that vehicle in the U.S. So this is a vehicle with 1,825 pounds of payload. It's a little bit larger than most midsize, but smaller than a full size. And you got a straight 6 with a turbo and a 5.5-foot bed, and it's a great platform for me for the U.S. because I like to haul motorcycles. I want to be able to go to Home Depot and get some lumber or whatever. So I like having a pickup truck. And in its current configuration, I have a Scout Yoho pop-up in the back. It's a composite camper, and it looks pretty great as a
It does, actually. It looks awesome. Yeah. All right. Thanks, Scott. We'll
let's go check it out.
Look. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks
everybody. See you in a few minutes. Hi, everybody. We're down in the workshop with Scott and his quartermaster. So we're just going to have a quick wander around. Following on from his pinnacle vehicle statement, what makes a pinnacle vehicle, we're going to dig into some of the detail of the quartermaster and see exactly what he means by that, and also some of the modifications we've got on this one.
Absolutely.
Let's take a look. Let's have a look.
Well, one of the things that we're always looking for in a pinnacle vehicle is durability and reliability. So everything that's on the Quartermaster, these are all proven components from proven component manufacturers. Something like a Tremec transfer case. Tremec makes components for heavy-duty vehicles around the world. Prop shafts from Dana, Carrero axles, this heavy-duty axles that are being made for four-wheel drive tractors. So this is a
combine harvesters,
exactly, heavy-duty vehicles. So even if we were to come and take a look, for example, at the tie rod in the front, the tie rod in the front here is the size of something that you would see on an F450. So this is a really heavy-duty tie rod, really heavy-duty drag link. The axles themselves are very robust. And right now, this is another good example of Grenadier and Ineos in general being very mindful of reliability. So I'm bringing the vehicle in for what's a 12,000 mile differential fluid swap. So we're swapping out the diff fluid. I took a look at the fluid and it was a real nice honey color, very small amount of metal particles on the mag trap. So the differentials are holding up to all of this extra weight and the larger tires. So those are the things that we're looking for in some of the durability of the front end. We've also got a proper metal skid plate. So a lot of manufacturers will have something that looks like this, but it's actually made out of plastic. So this is a proper metal skid plate. What are some of the other things that we're looking for here? We have 2 gross vehicle weight rated recovery points. So these are attached to the frame. That's why they're in alignment with the frame. And a lot of times you'll use these recovery points even during winching for bridling. So you'll bridle across both recovery points, take the winch line out to a pulley block, and then back to the bridling of these recovery
Spreading the load, right?
Spreading the load across both of the frame rails. This particular unit, since it's a Trial Master, this one has the optional Grenadier winch. It's made by Red Winch in the UK, which is known for making high quality winches. And this is the winch itself actually is a great example of a company that's very thoughtful. So normally you don't actually want a whole lot of line on the winch. If you need a lot of line out to do a recovery, you do it with extensions because you want to get the winch line down to the first or second layer on the drum so you can maximize the pulling power.
Mechanical advantage, right?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Because the rated capacity of the winch is on the first layer on the drum. So because Grenadier has Red Winch make this specifically for the Grenadier, it only has about 60 feet of line, and it's all synthetic line, which is a lot safer for operating in the field, and it also weighs much less, so it keeps the weight down. The bumper itself is steel, no plastic on this bumper. You've got some little trim pieces that are plastic, but the bumper itself is all steel. And then this is the rest of the world spec bull bar that's on the front.
And the other thing about this bumper, it's so nice that it's modular, right?
Yeah.
So if you do end up damaging one part of it, you haven't got to replace, a quarter of the...
What a great example.
Yeah, simple things make a huge difference.
They do make a huge difference.
Yeah.
But just the fact that it's a steel bumper, like how many vehicles are sold with a steel front bumper especially?
None, well, certainly no cars I can think of. Yeah, for sure.
Maybe some heavy-duty full-size trucks, but that's about it.
Yeah, for sure.
So no other modifications to the front of the vehicle. if we come around to the side, so one of the things that I do like to do on a vehicle is increase the diameter of the tire while retaining essentially the same width of the tire. This is a slightly wider tire, but it's 34 inches in diameter and about 11.5 inches wide. The factory tire is 32 inches in diameter and about 10.5 inches wide. So because it is very close to the same width as the factory tire, it tucks up into the wheel well properly, even under full articulation. But now I have additional ground clearance under the differentials. And because it's on a 17-inch wheel, with the taller section height, when I air down the tire, I end up with a lot more flotation, which is very effective for soft conditions like sand, mud, snow. I also made a little bit of a nod towards appearance, and I changed the wheels from the factory steel wheels, which I'm a huge fan of, to these Nomad aluminum wheels. I think it's just because they look great.
They kind of look
They look great.
don't they? Yeah.
I think they look awesome. They are a little bit lighter, but the wheels are totally a nod to vanity. I just like how they look. But the factory steel wheels is what I use in the vehicle across Africa. Steel wheels are easier to repair in the field. You can hammer them out if you've got some rock damage, whereas a lot of times an aluminum wheel will crack and then need to be replaced.
It's kind of done, isn't it, then, at that point?
A lot of times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
A lot of times.
Yeah.
And then the front suspension is all stock. Stock springs, stock dampers and shocks.
So talk us through, because this we're going to drop it down on the ramp in a couple of minutes, but talk us through the rear spring arrangement that you've got, because you're carrying a little bit more weight. So talk us through that.
Yeah, one of the great strengths of the Quartermaster is its payload. So it's got one of the highest payloads of any mid-size truck on the market. There are some packages from other manufacturers that get close, but this comes in at 1,825 pounds of payload. So it's suitable to actually carry a camper or a couple motorcycles in the back, or a heavy trailer that you're pulling with a lot of tongue weight. But I like the fact that I can actually haul this Scout camper in the back. The camper weighs 925 pounds. So you think you're starting with a camper that weighs just about 1,000, and then you've got 2 adults in the cab. I mean, I'm, 240 pounds with all my clothes on. So, and then, you have another passenger and maybe even some kids. You've got some luggage, you're carrying enough water, some recovery equipment,
there, right?
tools and everything else.
Yeah.
The cool thing is that I've weighed this truck with me in it, full of fuel, all the equipment that I need for the backcountry, the camper, and I'm still under gross vehicle weight, which is very difficult to do in a midsize. So that's the strength of the Quartermaster. I think consumers need to think of it like a heavy-duty midsize. So in the rear, it is coil sprung, 5-link, long travel, great for articulation, but coil springs inherently have trouble with variable loads. Whereas a leaf spring, as the spring starts to come under load, additional leaves get engaged, and it helps to support that load. So the spring rate that comes from the factory absolutely will take full payload, but it starts to squat a little bit in the rear. Normally when you use a pickup, you're like, I'm gonna go to Home Depot and I'm gonna load up with a bunch of plywood, and you don't care if it's squatting a little bit getting home. But with the camper, I want it to sit at the right height for ground clearance and
Handling, stability,
departure angle, handling and all that.
Yeah.
So I did change out the rear springs to iBox, which the factory springs are also iBox. But these have 500 pounds more payload capacity, and they're about 30 millimeters taller. But when this comes down off the lift, you'll see it just sits just right with the camper on it.
Cool. All right, let's get it down on the off the lift, and then we'll have a look at it at ground level. It's awesome, isn't it?
Great. Like, it's surprising how much, it's like driving around in a Mini Cooper. There's way more room inside than there should be.
Awesome.
So yeah, it's got a little stainless sink, and the table swings around and actually opens up into a much bigger table if you wanted it, which we never use it for that. But
is this an air conditioner?
It's an air conditioner and a heater. So it's a heat pump and an air conditioner. And I just set it up on the counter, and I run the exhaust out through the window. And then I run it as a heat pump, so it keeps it pretty warm in here.
Most important thing, of course.
Yeah. You got a beer bottle opener. And it's such a simple vehicle. There's no plumbing in the whole vehicle. The water is stored in this Lifesaver jerry can, which is a UK company, by the way.
I don't know about that.
Yeah, they're a great company. And this, you turn this and it pressurizes
Oh, okay.
the tank. So then you have positive pressure.
Yeah, to push the last one out.
That's right. And then you can, use in the sink.
Yeah.
And even stand outside and take a shower with it.
Right. So where's the waste out of this? Does it just
It just goes right out onto the ground. So you always have to use like biodegradable soap. You can. I do have a small hose kit if I'm in a campground that requires me to capture the gray water, so I can do that. But it's just a very simple overall vehicle. And right underneath your legs there is actually a composting toilet, a very small one.
Right.
So and that allows for, if you're in terrible weather or you're parked in a gas station parking lot and you just need to use the loo, right? So
you keep saying that funny word, the loo.
I know. I do it just for you.
That's for him.
Just for you.
Yeah, just
for you.
Yeah. And the bed then, it's just does any of this convert to a bed? I mean, obviously that's a bed up there.
This does convert into a bed.
Yeah.
And it's just about 6 feet long in here. So you, like, one person could sleep in here if you had to keep the top down for some reason.
Like if you just had to quickly get in and...
Or an extreme weather situation or whatever. Or if you had a kid with you, so you could sleep a kid or two kind of on these cushions. And then this is a double bed, and it's just over 6 feet wide, which even though I'm 6'1", I'm a side sleeper, so I always my legs are I'm never stretched out. If I do stretch out, it's not quite wide enough, but
and these sides are like a canvas type material. Yeah, which is breathable and stops a bit of wind and
it does, and it's proven to be totally waterproof. So
yeah, that's awesome.
And then it has a lithium-ion battery system and charging and all that other good stuff.
So talk us through the because obviously with the camper on, we don't have a tailgate. So I know you've fixed up something to fill in this gap here between where the tailgate would be and the where the camper is and the tailgate would be in the bumper.
That's a great question. So the Quartermaster has a very tall cab height, so the camper needed to be spaced up to fit over the cab. So that gave me an opportunity to build a subframe. So I built a steel 2-inch tall subframe. And that also allowed me to put the attachment points for the camper wider.
Right.
The factory tie downs are just about at this point down the frame rails.
Right.
So they're fairly inboard. So in order to get really good triangulation of the camper, I built this subframe, and you can actually see some of the lunettes there in the side that secure the straps.
Awesome.
So now it's properly triangulated and it spaces up the camper. And then because the tailgate's been removed, I built this, I had a metal brake,
This is alloy?
It is alloy. And then I just put some finishing elements on it just to keep the sharp edges down. And that fills in that gap.
So and an awesome use of your...
So it makes for a nice little step.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the ultimate camper setup, I think.
It's really comfortable. It's very minimalist, comes in at just over 900 pounds. It's all composite sides with metal reinforced corners for, when you're driving through a trail, branches and stuff will come along these metal corners and protect the camper. But I've just become a huge fan of that brand. They're made in the USA. And shockingly, it's nearly the same color as the truck. And this is just how this camper comes.
Yeah, it wasn't planned that way, right?
It was not planned that way. It was just very serendipitous. So.
Yeah, Scout don't call it magic mushroom, I'm assuming.
No, but it's pretty close. Pretty close to magic mushroom.
Right. Okay, then, Scott, well, thanks for your time. Thanks for...
You're welcome.
being interviewed by me and showing us your vehicle. Yeah,
You know,
it's
it's
been a
all-
pleasure. Yeah, it was a pleasure. I know
It's always a joy.
many times before, and I'm sure it'll be many times after. But yeah, nice to
so-
talk to you. Thanks for joining us.
Well, and you're doing a great job with this podcast.
All right,
so
thank you.
thank
Yeah.
you for putting that together for the community.
Yeah.
Continuing to educate Grenadier owners on adventure.
Absolutely,
So
that's what it's all about.
I think it's awesome for you to be doing that.
Yeah, all right. Thank you. Thanks for thanks for the kind words. Yeah, all right.
You're welcome. We
All right.
appreciate you watching too.
Thanks, everybody. We'll speak to you next time.